Hello, and welcome back to our second Firebase semi-live episode. Now, in this series, what we are doing is we are basically setting up some cloud functions that are listening to cloud PubSub notifications that are being generated by our billing channel. And eventually we are going to do something intelligent with these messages that we are receiving through these PubSub messages. We'll start by, pinging a Slack channel, being smarter about what information we send to that Slack channel. And then maybe even if we can figure it out, figure out how to disable our project altogether if it turns out things are going horribly wrong. And where we left off last time was we had created the PubSub topic, and our billing service was automatically generating these PubSub messages. And then we created a cloud function that listened to these PubSub messages and didn't do much more than just kind of print them out to the console. That's where we are right now. And before I continue, there's actually a few things I wanted to sort of correct from last time. So let's get into the code here. So the first thing I wanted to point out is I was still actually getting an error that I wasn't properly returning anything with this return statement. It turns out I think if I just call this return null, that actually works a little better. The other thing I pointed out is if you look at our documentation, it actually recommends that you place this line where you're trying to grab message.json into a try-catch block. I think this is basically to handle the situation a little more elegantly if the message you're receiving isn't actually JSON. Now, given that these are going to be automatically generated by our billing service, I don't foresee a lot of situations where we're not going to be getting proper JSON, but you know what? Always better to code defensively. So why don't we do that? Here, let me just, I guess let's just do here, try. We'll do that. And otherwise, we can console error. Couldn't parse JSON message. And here, little $sign brackets, error. And I think that should work. Here, we'll deploy this, and then we'll just double check that that all works. And now that that is all done, let's just test this by calling gcloud pubsub topics publish billing with the message, this is not JSON. And hopefully, if we go back to our console, we'll see that we now have a new message here. Well, that's basically the error that we caught. The third thing, which I already did, was I enlarged the font size here in the console. I realize I'm probably not zooming in as much as I normally do on typical screencast episode. I want to make sure you can still see what's going on my screen. So hopefully I'll remember to do that in my various browser windows. And I suppose if we wanted to double check that our function is still working as before, here, let's do a little gcloud. Yeah, here's a good one. This is just sort of an older test. And hopefully, in a few minutes, this will show up in our functions log, just again, spitting out this information, and hopefully without that little error that we had before that it wasn't properly returning a value. And sure enough, here it is. And there's our test. Once again, looking fine and no error message, which is nice. So this is okay, but as you probably noticed, every time we have to deploy our cloud functions, it takes a while. I'm, pausing the video so that you don't have to sit through 2.5 minutes of me not doing anything while we're waiting for these things to deploy. But that makes it hard, obviously, to develop and test if we have to kind of do that long deploy cycle every time we're trying to create a cloud function. Now, luckily, that's what our emulators are for. And they're super handy. In fact, you know what? Let me open up another tab here. And let's just CD into this. And I can call Firebase Emulator Start. By the way, in case you're curious, let's see what version of Firebase I have. I'm running at least version 8.12.1. I'll update this before the next video, just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. However, I can call Firebase Emulator Start. And this will go ahead, and it looks like right now I'm set up to run Cloud Firestore locally and functions locally. I don't have PubSub, the PubSub emulator set up locally, but here's the thing I found out. It turns out the PubSub emulator is kind of difficult to work with. I asked David East, who knows these things much better than me, hey, is there an easy way I can go ahead and sort of essentially trigger local PubSub so that I can test it with a locally running Cloud function running in the emulator? And his answer was, no, it's actually not easy at all. Probably something that I think the team is going to work on at some point because they are rapidly improving the emulator suite, as you've probably noticed. But right now, this is difficult to do. And so we're left with like a little bit of a quandary here where I can develop my Cloud functions locally, and it's really nice because I just sort of, save and npm run build, and my functions are ready for me to use, no deploying. But I can't seem to actually trigger my local functions using PubSub. I can only use this gcloud command or the console to trigger the actual PubSubs out on production. So how are we going to fix this? How are we going to be able to develop locally and also test locally? Well, the answer is a bit of a hack, but I'm all about little hacks. So let me show you what I'm going to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is let's do a little refactoring here. And I'm going to say we're going to pull this out into a little local function that I am going to call handle PubSub. And I'll move this up. There we go. And so this right here is clearly the logic that is going to really be doing most of the heavy lifting with my PubSub data. And so what I figured out as sort of a nice kind of decent way of doing production and testing, at least locally, is sort of alongside my official functions PubSub Cloud function, I'm going to go ahead and create another function that can be triggered through just a plain old HTTP call. And what this is going to do is it's going to take an argument that sort of looks like PubSub data, and I'm going to use it and pass it to my handle PubSub function. So let me show you what that looks like. You'll probably understand once you see it in the code. So I'll have a little exports.fakePubSub function here, and this is a functions.https.onRequest. And here I believe it's like, request response. And within here, what can I do? I'll say, all right, so our raw message is our request.body. And here I'm looking for the fake data argument that I will be passing in to my request. And should we console log this? Just in case. This is your raw data. And might as well also wrap this in a little try-catch block as long as we're doing that. What I will do is I will try to make our data equal to JSON parse this raw message string. And then I think I do need to add a little check, like if data is not undefined, then I will handle PubSub the data. And otherwise, again, maybe console error, could not convert JSON, although I suspect that will probably more likely show up down here in my catch block, so I'll also do a console error. Got an error. Whoops, or what, let's change this to backticks. And here we go. Well, let's see, because this is an HTTPS function, probably the proper way to end it is just to add a little response.send call at the bottom. So I could say response.send, all done, check your logs. Let's see, I think that should do it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that'll do it. All right, here, let me open up another function here. Let's copy the directory. I'm sure there is a obvious, iterm command for open up another shell in this exact directory. I don't know what it is. If you do, put it in the comments and you'll win 5 internet points. So let's see, let's go into my functions directory and I can call npm run build to compile my function. And there we go. I was like, where is the URL? Here it is. So it's displaying right here the URL that I can now call to call this function, or the locally emulated function. So in fact, here, let me just call it up here in a browser. And there you go. It seems to be running and it's getting an error because it's expecting a fake data argument that's going to be passed in some JSON. It's not seeing that. And so it's saying, hey, I couldn't parse that, but we can fix that pretty easily. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and build up a little curl command to call this locally. And I'm actually going to do that. Let's just bring it up in another file here. So it's going to be a curl and request post and data. And here we'll have fake data equals, and this is going to be essentially the payload of what we would expect to see in our PubSub message. So that'll go there, and then we will, call that to this URL. So here, let's just try it first with foobar. And sure enough, that seemed to work. And so then, yeah, I could actually probably just copy this from the command line here, can I? So there we go. If I want a local test where I want to, pretend what's going to happen if I generate $33.33, I now have that all set up. Right, so it'll be really easy to continue to call this call locally, using a simple old HTTPS call, with the idea that as I iterate most of the logic inside my handle PubSub method, that will get applied both if I am using this HTTPS trigger as well as the PubSub one. So yeah, now I can continue to develop and test a whole lot faster than having to deploy my Cloud function every time, which was even like 10 minutes into this video, kind of a pain. All right. So I guess the next thing is, now that we're getting this data, let's do something with it. And maybe we'll start by sending a message to a Slack channel. I guess before we do that, I didn't actually explain really what the contents of this payload message are. So most of it should be fairly obvious, but just in case, let's go over it. So budget display name is the display name of this specific budget. And that basically corresponds to, in your Cloud Console billing budgets and alerts section, what's listed here as the budget name. So in our case, our actual budget is called semi-live money spender. The alert threshold exceeded. So as you recall, I've set up alerts, in this case at like 50%, 90%, 100%. In other cases, when I've been doing more extensive testing, it's been like 1, 2, and 5%. This basically says, what was the last threshold that you set up here that was exceeded? So if I'm in my semi-live money spender and I've spent 75% of my budget, this alert threshold succeeded number, and I'll make the font a little bigger, would equal 50, right? Because that's the most recent threshold that was exceeded. The cost amount is the actual amount that I have spent in this billing cycle. Cost interval start is when this billing cycle started. It's typically the beginning of the month. This apparently happened on January 1st, 2019, because it's placeholder data. Budget amount is the amount that you have set up for your budget. And budget amount type is the type of budget. And this can either be, I believe, specified amount, where you're saying, hey, my budget for this month is $100, or relative amount, where you say, hey, my budget is 110% of what I spent last month, something like that. I typically just work with specified budgets, but just so you know. And then currency code is the currency that all of this is in my case, US dollars. Now, for the most part, I'm primarily going to be working with the cost amount, how much you spent, and cost interval start, beginning of the billing cycle for these videos. And so I think probably what we'll do is, for our first bit of logic where we're going to spit out information to Slack, we'll print out the content of this cost amount. We'll let you know how much you've spent. So let's do that. And to do that, we have to do a little bit of development, creating a little Slack bot to print out this information for me. Now, I'm not much of an expert when it comes to Slack development, but I was able to stumble around enough with their website that I kind of was able to figure out what I was doing. So good enough. But again, if any of you out there have had a lot of experience building bots on Slack and you see me doing something that I could be doing better or more intelligently, let me know in the comments below. Be nice about it, and we would all love to hear it. So let's see, I'm going to start by going to api.slack.com. And this is where you can go ahead and start building tools. And I'm just going to click this Start Building button. Can that work? All right, so I'm going to give my app a name. I will call it Semi-Live Notification notification thing. And the workspace will just be this workspace that I've got set up with this account. I will say create app. And yay. Let's see, I guess the next thing I probably need to do is give it permissions. And down here in scopes, this is where I'm going to ask my for scopes for my bot. And I think all I actually need is chat.write. I thought I might also need, where is it, like incoming webhook? But I'm actually not sure if that's necessary. I don't see it here. Somewhere in here, there you go, incoming webhook. I actually don't think using the Slack JavaScript library that's necessary. And so following the principle of least privilege, don't add more scopes to your app than you need. I'm going to start with just chat write and see if that works. So let's try that. Okay, so I'm going to install the app to my workspace. And yes, I will allow. I guess maybe the next thing I should do is I'm going to go ahead into Slack and I'm going to create, just because I probably have another test room somewhere where I've got some of my bots already running, I'm going to create a new room just for this bot. And yeah, let's create a new channel and I will call it Semi-Live Alerts. Great. Okay, so now I've got this room set up and I believe I've got my application set up. Let's go ahead and see if I can have my application ping this room. And so I'm going to do that by using the Slack library. So within my functions directory, I am going to call npm install Slack, save, and that should install the Slack JavaScript library. And then up here, I am going to import Slack equals require Slack. And then, so basically the code for sending a notification using the Slack library is slack.chat.postMessage. And in here you have a few arguments. So the token is going to be this bot user OAuth access token. So I'm going to copy that and I'll, for right now, put it up here as like a constant. But this is actually a bad idea. So as I'm doing this, to do, bad idea, don't put this in the code. Somewhere in the Slack documentation was this very well written page talking about some nice security related best practices. And one of which is, hey, you know, this access token, it's kind of special. It's kind of not really intended for other people to see because then they can essentially act as this bot. So you kind of want to leave this hidden, you know, make it an environment variable or something. And I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. For now though, just for the sake of development and for the sake of keeping this video hopefully under half an hour, I'm going to just keep it here. So my token will be my Slack access token. My channel will be what I call it, semi-live alerts. And my text is going to be, hello world. Alrighty. So this should be all I need to post a message to this room, but I'm getting some errors. Let's see why. All right, well, it's telling me, hey, your promises need to be handled appropriately. So because Slack chat post message is making a network call, this is basically an asynchronous call. And so it's returning a promise. Well, actually, so probably what I want to do is do the right thing in a Cloud function. I'm going to return this. Now that's going to cause a little bit of an issue here because it's like, wait a minute, you said this is an asynchronous function and now this is happening here. So I actually think the right thing to do would be to return this as well. Down here, you're also running into this error, but because this is happening within HTTPS request, I actually think maybe it's a little better. We will just await the handling of that PubSub data. And so now this is saying, well, that's a problem because this function needs to be marked as async. And so I will do that. And that seems to be working. I'm actually sort of surprised. I feel like TypeScript should be giving me an error that this isn't being marked as async. I don't know why it's not, but can I just, I'm gonna do that anyway. I'm very suspicious as to why TypeScript is not complaining. Normally, I feel like it would be. Well, you know what? Let's just test this and see what happens. Famous last words. All right, so I'm gonna run this. And it looks like absolutely nothing has happened. Hasn't attempted to talk to, normally I would see some message like, hey, I'm trying to talk to your chat room. I don't see anything like that in here. And well, the reason this is happening is because I did not call npm run build after I changed my function. For those of you, by the way, who were wondering, well, why do you need to do that? When you're working in TypeScript, generally speaking, you're going to sort of put all of your code here in the source directory, but then calling npm run build essentially generates this JavaScript that appears in your lib directory. That's kind of the actual functions that are getting run by Cloud Functions. So basically, every time you make a change in your source, you want to call npm run build. And because I keep forgetting to call npm run build, some folks who watched my last Semi-Live series came up with some very nice recommendations, one of which was, hey, you could just run tsc-watch, standing for a TypeScript compiler watch. And what this will do is basically, it's going to go ahead and just sort of watch for changes in your source directory. And every time you, whoops, here, I'll close this, sorry. And every time you make changes, in here, so if I changed hello there world, that probably happened too fast for you to even notice, but this watch command said, oh, looks like you changed a file. I'm just going to go ahead and recompile. And so it did. So now my code is actually running and I don't have to worry. Every time I make changes in here, those will get reflected immediately in my locally emulated Cloud Functions. So let's run this one more time and see what happens. I'm getting an error. The error is not in channel. And the reason that is happening is because I may have added this app to my workspace, but I still need to explicitly go ahead and add that app to my individual channel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that semi-live notification thing. And I think that should do it. Again, there's some good documentation somewhere in Slack's documentation explaining kind of the difference between creating your app and authorizing it versus adding it into a room. It's kind of the difference between like maybe publishing an app to the App Store and a user actually downloading it and installing it and saying, yes, I give you permission to, send me notifications or what have you. It's kind of similar situations here. So you might go ahead and add the app, but, or generate the app into your workspace, but someone needs to explicitly add the app to a room. So I think now this should probably work. Let's try it. Oh, look at that. I got hello there world. Well, that's lovely. Let's do it one more time. There it is again. All right. I'm very excited about seeing hello world pop up in my chat. So I think we're making pretty good progress. I think the only thing we have to do now is let's be a little more intelligent, not just say, hello world. Let's change this to, what we'll do again is we'll spit out this cost amount information. I think that'll work here. So I'm going to change this text to, and I'll use the backtick so I can do some little string interpolation. It looks like you have spent, and this will be, again, my data dot, let me just copy this field so I don't do any misspellings, cost amount so far. Wait, I need to put a $sign before this $sign. All right, so I'm going to save that. All right, no errors. That's nice. I'm going to go ahead and run this one more time. And there you go. It's shown up properly. right there in my Slack room, telling me that I have spent that much so far. So this actually seems like a pretty good stopping point. I feel like we've made some pretty good progress here. So to recap what we did, I fixed a few things from last time. I'll probably do that next time too. And then I made it a lot easier to develop Cloud functions that respond to PubSub notifications by using the locally emulated function. So I can very quickly, run and test the functions. But since it's currently, at the time of this video, hard to generate local PubSub notifications for those functions to respond to, I created sort of an alternate version that responds to, directly an HTTP call, and then I just call that on localhost. Once I did that, I could then put everything into my single handle PubSub method. And then once I did that, I just did a little work to install a Slack app. Again, I sort of went to Slack. Apparently, all I need to do is add that chat write permission. Didn't even need an incoming webhook, which surprised me. I could then, use the Slack library to call Slack chat post message with the token that should not remain in code, the channel name, and the text. And then I just made sure that text was something that, reflected a little bit of the cost, the amount that I've spent so far in the PubSub. So, yay, pretty good progress. I think this is probably a good time to pause. Also because I want to show you what happens once I have this function running for a couple of hours, because some interesting things will happen. I'm actually going to go ahead, and before I forget, I'm going to Firebase deploy these functions. And then I'll see you back here in the next episode, where probably a few hours will have passed. So I'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.